They're closing in on the ultimate prize in Iraq. And right now, ISIS is only 8 miles out from the Baghdad airport, and that is terrifying, not to mention a giant disappointment for many Americans who fought so hard in Iraq. Now, ISIS has lots of money, heavily armed, loaded with shoulder-fired missile launchers. Already twice this week, ISIS shooting down Iraqi helicopters. Also today, a raging fight for the Syrian town of Kobani. ISIS trapping civilians in that town. Now a massacre is feared. But that's not all. ISIS could invade Turkey. Greg Palcott is standing by on the border. But first, the dangerous threat to the Baghdad airport. Kevin Barron, executive editor of the news website Defense One, joins us. Nice to see you, Kevin. And tell me, ISIS is 8 miles out from the airport?
8 miles out, yep. There's conflicting reports, I guess, from the Pentagon and intelligence of how much they control Abu Ghraib, or they're just there. And
that's the suburb.
Right, and whether or not that means that the airport is next, for example. I think that's a step that the Pentagon isn't willing to go just so far yet.
All right, the Pentagon doesn't act, hugely, terrified, at least the things that I read. However, the 2 weeks ago was 50 miles out. So, I mean, the movement is not in a direction that's favorable to us and to the Iraqi people in Baghdad.
That's right, and the Pentagon keeps saying that they're doing airstrikes as they've been instructed, and they've been doing them for weeks. And they've also been saying that they need help on the ground. And right now, it's the Iraqi security forces fighting for themselves. There's no coalition of Arab ground forces on the way, and there's no American ground force on the way as well.
All right, well, so I would think airstrikes are working if tonight you and I were talking about 75 miles out rather than, but we're talking so close. What happens if ISIS takes the airport? What does that mean?
Well, it's a big if, I guess, is the point. That, when you, inside the Pentagon, they still feel that Baghdad will hold. The Iraqi security forces that are in charge of defending Baghdad are well entrenched, they're well defended, and to include the airport. But as well, the Pentagon does not have a mandate to protect the airport. They're not the cavalry for it. There are some Apaches there. There's an element there, but their job is to protect the American embassy and the Americans in Baghdad, not the airport.
How can the Pentagon be so certain in light of the fact that they're marching towards Baghdad, that we're 50 miles 2 weeks ago, 8 miles tonight? Anbar is now having terrific problems. Mosul went down in June. We've seen ISIS growing. So why is the Pentagon? What's the indicator to say that we should feel like this is working?
Well, because you got to think of the defenses for the city harden as you get closer, right? So this is like saying if they took Loudoun County versus taking Washington D.C. versus taking the Pentagon. These are different levels of defense that they're approaching. So again, Baghdad itself has a much stronger element of protection to it, and there's a reason I think why ISIS so far hasn't tried to take Baghdad.
All right, what's going on with the Anbar province?
Well, the Pentagon says the Anbar is in flux. That's Central Command's own term, right?
In flux.
In flux.
That doesn't sound good.
That's not exactly what you expect to hear from commanders. And there are some cities like Haditha where they think Iraqi security forces are holding, and there are others like Fallujah, which are they consider contested. I think you could say they're far more than contested.
Are they alarmed?
There's alarm, yes, absolutely, and there's, like you said at the top, there's a lot of regret, there's a lot of anger from commanders and troops who fought hard in the years of Iraq, to especially places like Fallujah, to take those cities and to give them to the Iraqi people. But the alarm now, I think, is past them, right? These groups of these cities have fallen, the groups have taken them over, and now it's Baghdad and this just airstrikes, and what comes next? I think that's the concern, the question that you're hearing over and over again.
They use the term influx in Anbar, and because it looks pretty bad. And so I'm just having a hard time that they don't think that Baghdad is in flux in light of the fact that they keep marching closer and closer and closer, and they're shooting down Iraqi helicopters.
Well, if ISIS is in Anbar and is actually in control of a lot of those cities, and the Pentagon describes it as in flux, then they're not in Baghdad, right? And the thought is that even if some elements of ISIS get into Baghdad, it would be like you've seen elsewhere with terrorist campaigns. It'd be IEDs, it'd be very disruptive, but it's not divisions marching into the city to take a giant national capital.
Well, I hope that the calm that the Pentagon seems to have is right, and I hope that I'm just an alarmist, because I think the signs are bad. But anyway, you're closer to it anyway. Kevin, thank you.
My pleasure.
And breaking now, hundreds of civilians trapped, and there are fears of a massacre. All of this in Kobani on the Turkey-Syria border. Fox News senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is right there on the border. Greg?
Greta, U.S. airstrikes might be picking up against ISIS, but the terrorists do not seem to be slowing down. Take a look at what we saw on the Turkey-Syria border today. Appearances can be deceiving. Overall, the Syrian town of Kobani looks pretty peaceful today. But for the past couple of hours, we have been hearing a battle royal coming from the center of town. Just behind a long line of trees is the Kurdish defenders' headquarters. According to our sources, the ISIS terrorists have taken it over today. But according to the combat that we are hearing from there, the fight is still on. Sources also tell us that ISIS now could have control of the only border crossing between Kobani and Turkey. That is the only way the Kurds can get casualties and civilians out of there, reinforcements and resupplies in. Terrorists are making their moves despite that increased air activity. By our count, there have been 32 U.S. coalition airstrikes against ISIS in and around Kobani just in the past week. The concern here, though, is that they're all too late. And it's another tense night here in Turkey on this side of the border. Ethnic Kurds have been clashing with police and Turkish authorities. Deadly riots have been across this country all this past week. Folks are upset about Turkey not doing more about ISIS, and so is the United States. General John Allen was meeting with Turkish officials today in the capital of Ankara. He is the head of the U.S.-led anti-ISIS campaign, but he doesn't seem to have changed too many minds here in Turkey during this trip. Bad news for those folks trapped inside of Kobani, literally face-to-face with the terrorists. Greta.
Okay, Greg, if those civilians are trapped there and that border crossing is closed, they can't leave it. They are there. And ISIS has been terrible to civilians in other parts of Iraq and Syria. Is that what we can expect for those civilians trapped there?
Big fears, Greta, if in fact ISIS take over. Right now, we figure they are in about 1/3 of the town. And as they move across, if they can gather another third of territory, then those folks are in real trouble. Perhaps then the pressure will be on Turkey to act. Again, from our live position, we saw rows and rows of Turkish tanks, their turrets pointed towards Kobani, but doing absolutely nothing. That might be the game changer if thousands of civilians are in jeopardy of dying and other torture. Back to you, Greta.
So the question is, with ISIS getting closer and closer to controlling Kobani and closing in on Baghdad, it is gaining ground in both Syria and Iraq. Is there anyone who thinks airstrikes are enough? Congressman and Air Force veteran Adam Kinzinger joins us. Good evening, sir.
Hey, Greta. Thanks for having me.
All right, with the summary that Anbar is in flux, that's what the Pentagon calls it, which to me is a really bad sign. You've got Kobani that is now taken over by ISIS, and the civilians can't get out, and they'll probably get massacred by ISIS. We've seen what they've done other places. And now ISIS is 8 miles outside Baghdad, and we've been doing these airstrikes for a month. Can you tell me if these airstrikes are working?
Let me just first off say I literally feel sick, actually feel sick hearing about this stuff and knowing what's going to happen in Kobani. I mean, these ISIS, these are elderly folks that are left there, the people that couldn't leave. Are the airstrikes helping? Yeah, they're helping some. I just got back from Iraq 10 days ago. Bombing of ISIS in Iraq has been able to stop their momentum. It did save Erbil. It's probably slowed them down a little bit. In Syria, I'm not sure how much we've been able to do besides kind of tick them off a little bit.
Let me ask you that. I mean, like, everybody slowing them down, but I mean, it's like, but we haven't stopped them. I mean, look at the inroads, look at the progress they've made. I mean, how can this be a success?
It's not, and that's the thing is we can slow them down, but the inevitability is going to happen. And when I've been advocating for airstrikes for a long time, but I didn't envision this kind of pinprick occasional exercise. I envisioned something like shock and awe, the opening of 2003, which just puts ISIS on its heels and has them realize that they messed with the wrong country and they're messing with the wrong folks. And that's not happening. Instead, yeah, we are disrupting some supply chains. We're blowing up some barracks. We're taking out some fighters. But all we're doing is delaying what appears to be the inevitable without some bigger